Recently I've been watching a lot of Phase Jev videos, and something about the idea of doing an Osu cut commentary is very entertaining to me. I've been thinking about it, and for these sort of videos, obviously I'm not necessarily trying to appeal to anyone in particular. Just kind of on a whim, mostly just for my own entertainment. Hold up, it's kind of annoying to type because I have a weird setup right now. Yeah, I don't know, let's just get on and mess around a little bit. Obviously AR8 was sort of my thing. AR8 DT. But I'm fucking washed up. I'm still kind of nice with it sometimes though. But yeah, recently I've been watching a lot of Cookie Z videos, really indulging in this sort of nostalgia associated with this game for myself, which is very deep nostalgia that is very difficult for really anyone to get, because the way I view Osu is very particular because I had such a long history playing this game. And also, even when I did play, I sort of had a strange vision of it compared to people. I mainly only played old stuff. Every once in a while though, I like going offline, just messing around, playing good music. But something you sort of realize watching a lot of the old sort of Osu clips is that honestly a lot of this stuff that was being done back then, it's hard to contextualize with everything the way the game is nowadays, where everything's sort of easy and the skill cap has gotten so high that it just makes everything look like a joke. But from back in the day, but something I did was I was watching like this strange program, Cookie Z play, and that shit is like aesthetically perfect in a way that's very hard to articulate. Because I know that like guys like Peppy, people complain, will be like, oh, whatever XYZ sort of fun thing. Oh, and Peppy will always be like, no, that's like the fun of the game, like having the character pop up on the side, the fire, all that stuff, Or like when Peppy would like lament about people turning on, well, I think originally it was backgrounds back in the day, but then they added you can get rid of the background fade during breaks. It was always, the contention was sort of like, it's the fun. But when you look back at videos like the Strange program, Cookie Z play with everything turned on, you sort of realize what he was actually getting at. And he's actually right. He is actually correct, because that video taps into a very particular style that is not seen anymore today, even remotely. The whole Nico thing, like, because if you know anything about Peppy, he knows Japanese and he's like tapped into that sort of culture. So I heavily respect sort of what he was doing back then. I think the old Osu Klein is like aesthetic perfection. And Laser is kind of, it's too much in my opinion. It's too forced, way too forced. Trying to standardize it, be more like DDR or whatever, I think that's not exactly the play. But I get it's a passion project and all that. And it's funny because, like, if you really are tapped into Osu, you know, a lot of people would complain about like combo-based scoring, like Chippy, Chippy live streams. I used to watch all that shit all the time. Chippy live stream. I'm not trying to put it on no fail, by the way, because man, I used to fucking watch hella Chippy live streams. But people, these are, like, a lot of the complaints that are levied towards the game, the whole accuracy thing, and I think a combo is sort of like, it seems like back in the day it was like, oh yeah, combo scoring sucks or whatever, right? But I don't know. It definitely added a personality to the game. It made it stand out, being unique. But obviously back in the day it's easier to complain about it because you didn't know the alternative and the realities of the alternative. But I think a lot of that too is also, I don't know. When there's a combo incentive, it does make the game inherently more interesting from a viewer perspective, because you're also taking into account, like, there's certain like anxiety that makes it interesting, tension. If you're getting if you don't get the KP unless you have combo, it incentivizes a certain playstyle, certain tension that I don't think you really get as much with the way things are now. Of course, in an acute sense, though, you know, with the way, say, CSR is, right? I think that's what they call it. You know, it does sort of raise the general player skill, though, even if it is people spamming 10-second maps or whatever and getting like B ranks, because you know people can train more subtle things and all that stuff, but there's a certain magic you lose, like you know, like old school, like you know, hard rock on like a Dragon Force map, you know what I mean, like 500 pp play, but like there's a sort of tension there that you don't really see as often, or if you do see it, it's kind of like overstimulated, because all the maps, even if they are these sort of longer maps that are seen as, you know, high tension or whatever, right? They're sort of made just to be as difficult as possible in a way that's just kind of like, you know, make the streams really spaced, you know, it's, I don't know, it's less of a psychological thing, I guess. Whereas the older maps, like say, I don't know, any sort of old Dragon Force map from like the spaghetti era of Dragon Force maps, they were sort of simple looking back at them, like they're not necessarily hard maps, but something about that made it actually more engaging. Like they were more standardized. Well, that's not really the correct way of wording it, because like obviously, like, because I know the obvious like rebuttal to this is like, oh, it's just nostalgia, but it's not. It's actually not just nostalgia. Like genuinely, the culture in the game back in the day was just more. It had more of an affordance for a certain sort of way of doing things. Things were more interesting, I guess. And I know oh, it's just nostalgia, but it's really not. It really isn't. You know, and this it's part of it. It's just the game is just you know, more popular, and these are sort of the natural death of any sort of subculture occurs when you get an influx of people and etc. You know, people figure out what to train and all that, but how to train more effectively and all that stuff. But I think, in my personal opinion, the culture of the game is probably around its best in like 2017-ish, 2016, 2017, 2015. 2013, like that era, I think was probably the peak of the game. Like it's probably the golden era, because this stuff and stuff before that was good too. But a lot of that stuff is kind of lost to history unless you were actually there. But 2017, you know, everybody was sort of live streaming. You know, there was a defined hierarchy that wasn't completely out of reach, but in a way that was engaging. Cookie Z was like a character, you know. When things become too easy, you sort of lose those sort of spectator factors. That you sort of lose those sort of you know, like being like watching stuff outside of the Coliseum or whatever. You get, you know, that you sort of have. Again, it's not like stuff isn't as engaging as it was, but it's just not quite. I don't know. Same with like, and this is like, for example, like Zeltol's run back in like 2020, and that, there's a certain like aesthetic to that time period that is very particular. And again, you just don't really get that sort of thing. Part of that is because people are generally just better at the game, so skill is more evenly distributed. That's probably the better way of putting it, actually. Skill is more distributed across people. It's decentralized, I guess. Whereas back then, skill was definitely more of a centralized thing. You know, like this guy was the speed guy, this guy was the gimmick guy, this guy was the aim guy, and you had the guys like Cookie Z who could sort of play everything to the level of what it actually was, the level of difficulty. And when you go back and look at like old Cookie Z videos, you honestly get the impression that he's not really trying. Because I think a lot of people don't really understand about Cookie Z is that Cookie Z never really like, it's difficult to word this in a way that in a way that'll make sense, but Cookie Z never really trained in a real sense. Like obviously that sounds kind of stupid, but like if you look back and watch a lot of old Cookie Z plays, it looks like he's kind of just fucking around. You know, like and obviously he would contest that if I were to say that. He would say, yeah, you know, because I know people going to, like, he would always be like, you know, this is just how I do it, you know, I don't need backs. But you know, imagine if Cookie Z actually took the game like seriously, like seriously, you know. It's kind of scary to think about back then. Like because you watch the old stuff and it's clear that he's sort of just which I think contributes to it, because I think one key thing to actually genuinely good at Osu, or really anything, but you have to be not very attached to it, right? And that's something you get with Cookie Z. He doesn't seem like he's very attached to any of the maps. He just sort of plays it, you know? But there is an emotional element in the sense that, you know, like what he had the whole thing where he wouldn't play like metal songs or whatever. So he never played like Apparition. So you have that sort of sense. But Emmerich is kind of like even more so that. Like he doesn't give a fuck, right? He'll just do anything, whatever. And I think that's probably the best way to go about it if you just care about pure skill. But I always got the impression that Cookie Z always just sort of... He cared about being good, obviously he did, but... It's different from how other people care about being good. It was just very natural to him, I suppose. Rapid Trigger sort of obliterated tapping as a skill, to be quite honest. It's just trivial now. Obviously, I mean, I've written about it an extent in the past. My prediction of the game back in like, and that was pretty much accurate in the sense that, because I wrote like a how to get good at speed document whenever I wrote that, I don't even know, like 2021 maybe. And pretty much back then the sort of general sort of BPM, like the BPM most people were not able to do was like 285 was sort of like a soft cap back then. Like only a select few people could really do 285 plus stuff that was actually hard, high strain. And then only an even lower selection of that could do 300, right? And then even lower with the higher, like pretty much only like Zestiny, or like a few other select people with gimmicky playstyles could go above that. But stuff like Rapid Trigger basically raised the speed cap up to like, I don't know, at least plus 15, plus 20. So like 300 is sort of like the. Of course, these are all sort of vague numbers. I don't really pay attention much, but clearly it went up and it sort of trivialized. Like 260 and 270 and all that stuff, so it's not even remotely, like I have not even warmed up at all, I'm just casually playing with the fucking wooden keypad and this shit is like it feels like air to play 260 now. Like I'm not even warmed up, I literally just got on the game, started playing, like it doesn't even, there's like no difficulty with these lower BPMs, like, but back in the day it used to be actually, but also part of that too is reduced training, you know, people weren't really training speed the same way back then. But it's a combination of it's not just a mono-causal thing, but it's a bunch of confounding factors. But all these sort of confounding factors do contribute to the overall vibe of the game in a cultural sense. And generally speaking, I think all the factors sort of aligned the most back in you know, like I said, that period I was talking about, like 2013 up to, well, it's different, but 2013 was way different. But like 2017, I think was really good for the game. Even though 2017, you know, 2018 was good. You know, 2019, that sort of era. You know, 2017 when Wolf and fucking Poland win the fucking OWC. You know, like those are moments that a player that started off today would never be able to really get on the same level. But I know a lot of this boils down to just like nostalgia or whatever, or even though I actually do think it is genuinely different, it's not just blinded by nostalgia. There's very clearly a difference in the way the game's perceived and stuff like that. But it's not really an Osu thing though, right? It's just what happens whenever a culture gets bigger and things get more optimized in general. It's not really unique to Osu per se, but I just have a lot of familiarity with the game, so it comes out like that. I wonder if we'll hit any good clips. I highly doubt it. I highly doubt we will hit any sort of clips in this video. I'm still kind of nice with it in a certain way. I'm sort of nice with it still, but definitely not quite what it used to be. My skill. Another thing about the you know, the way speed used to work is part of that thing I wrote is that, you know, part of it too is an aim thing too. Like the best speed players usually were not the guys that had the best aim, right? So once the sort of differential between the guys who have the aim and the speed come together, that's when you get sort of the best plays. I guess you could say a lot of ways Osu today is less cinematic. Maybe that's a way of putting it. That makes sense. It's more decentralized, but this is a lot of way, like again, this applies to a lot of different areas in the world, not just because modernity. But perhaps it's a way of thinking about it, actually. It's less cinematic than it used to be. But yeah, I kind of like the idea of just messing around this channel, not like giving a fuck about trying to go for anything in particular in terms of like viewership. Because that's something I realized about the way things are nowadays on the internet is that there's this idea of like trying to farm retention, trying to gain retention, all retention. But if you think about it for more than, you know, if you think about the sort of logical conclusion of what that actually means, it pretty much just means that the end game of retention farming is basically just you're appealing exclusively to the most general audience as possible, which means you're going to have to be pretty much the most sanitized you could possibly be, and appealing to, like, I don't know, the world and third world and like India and like all these sort of places that are the quality just drops to a dramatic degree, and which is, you know, normal. But there is something to be said about purposefully maintaining a sort of nicheness about yourself, right? Like, obviously I'm very well aware that the videos I post on this channel are not going to be, they're not going to be really gain any sort of traction whatsoever, but there is a small group of people that do engage with it. And that to me is the most interesting thing. Sort of intentionally cultivating these sort of smaller groups. And like obviously, you know, the stuff on TikTok and Instagram, you know, those are like pop, it's pop. You know, the videos I make are essentially intentionally pop videos, and I stated that like deliberately before on like fucking Twitter. Like, and the videos are supposed to be catchy, they're supposed to be like, but still sort of artful, you know. I'm not just making clips for the sake of making clips, but there's actually like a sense of it's an artistic thing, you know. It's not just making stuff purely just to gain followers. There is that sort of not latent, but there's a sort of in the background, there's a sense of like, oh yeah, this is kind of like an artistic thing, you know, even though it does still have, you know, even though it still is sort of designed to appeal to a wider market, it's not so sanitized to the point of being completely uninteresting. Though I do think that would be a accurate critique of the whole thing, of what I do on like TikTok and Instagram. But it's not like much people, it's not like a lot of other people are doing much better, to be quite honest. So, but yeah, I mean, I get it. It's pretty easy to say that my stuff is like banal or whatever if you actually look at it as a corpus. But I think it'll age quite well long term. Things are only going to get more and more atomized as time goes on, so there's not really much you can do if you have individual aspirations in the way social media works nowadays. Something that made Cookie Z stand out back in the day too was a sense of like refined nature of playing, you know? Like he would do the whole, his hand positioning it felt like it was sort of aristocratic almost. There's something about that. Where's Crazy J? Not that Crazy J. There's a different. This Crazy J. The good thing about OC though, it's pretty easy to disconnect yourself from any sense of community and just kind of do whatever you want and think of it however you want and play the game however you want. Really, nothing stops you from just doing some weird play style or doing some gimmicky stuff, and you can genuinely find a lot of success doing that too. So if you truly become like the best at some sort of weird sort of gimmick or whatever, so there's a lot of interesting ways to play the game. So I think OSU will always be interesting in general, regardless of anything. But there definitely was some sort of a sense of a certain way of frame of experiencing the game that is not longer doable. I guess recently I've been sort of putting myself in a nostalgic rabbit hole of consuming old material and thinking about it, which probably isn't good. I read something on Twitter about that actually, about how some guy was playing World of Warcraft and he kind of realized like, yeah, like, because he used to play it back in the day or whatever, and he kind of realized like, yeah, like all this stuff is It's kind of dumb to do. I think it's sort of it's another reason. It's another sort of modernity thing, overabundance of optimized content and stuff. It's natural to look back at things when you were young, and then since everything is so dense now on these websites like YouTube, you can literally just make your entire feed old shit. Like I'm watching a lot of Call of Duty game battles from like 2013 recently, like MW3. And there's enough content from that period to where you can just sort of trap yourself in a little old rabbit hole of that period and not really evolve past. You can just keep it. You can stay there. And there's all these little niches. Everything's more niched down, so it's very easy to sort of just remain in that sort of state. So these nostalgia traps aren't necessarily a good thing. It kind of distracts from what one could be doing. But it's not like a lot of the new stuff that's content-wise is much better. So maybe at the end of the day it doesn't really matter that much. But I think when it comes to like constantly only engaging in sort of nostalgic experiences, there's definitely a cost to that. Subtly, if you overindulge. That was actually pretty damn good. That wasn't even bad, actually. I was honestly reading that way better than I thought I would, those patterns. Well, I want to see if I can hit one clip, actually. Or at least give a good earnest attempt at hitting this one clip. Let's give an earnest attempt at this shit. I still sort of got it on that. Oh, I still sort of got it. I can still play a DJ Pop. Even if I'm 45 years old, I can probably still decently play a DJ Pop map. My finger control reading is weirdly not that bad right now. My controllers that are tapping wise. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I still hit all the main parts. But yeah, classic. I first actually this map back in like 2018. And back then it was actually cool, because I only had like Cookie Z and Serena were the only FCs on this back in the day. I can always play DJ Pop decently, but I guess that's the end of the Hosu fucking cut com. Probably, I don't know, we'll see what happens, but this is fucking stupid.